Okay, so welcome to another deep dive. We're really excited about this one. We're going to be talking about English language teaching. And this is something that a lot of you guys out there have been asking about and wanting us to do a deep dive on. And luckily, you provided us with a fantastic source to get started with: Learning Teaching, The Essential Guide to English Language Teaching, third edition by Jim Scrivener.
Yes, this book is a treasure trove of information on ELT. It's really a comprehensive guide for anyone involved in teaching English, and it covers such a broad spectrum of topics, from the initial steps you take as a teacher in the classroom, all the way through to designing engaging activities, managing your students effectively, getting to know who they are as learners, and really digging into the language itself, analyzing its various aspects, and finally how to plan those really effective lessons that make a difference.
Yeah, and I mean, this is a big book, and we know you're busy. So what we want to do today is give you kind of the express route through it. We're gonna pull out those essential ideas, those unexpected insights, those things that maybe jumped out at us as we were going through it. Give you a solid foundation for understanding what makes English language teaching effective,
hmm
without sort of bogging you down with too much detail.
Absolutely. We want this to be a practical deep dive, a useful deep dive for you.
Exactly.
So where should we begin?
Well, I think a good place to start is with the teacher themselves, right? And the kind of environment where this learning is taking place. And right at the beginning, the book asks this really interesting question: what is a teacher?
Yeah.
And it makes you pause for a moment because, we often associate language learning with having a teacher, but the book points out that, it can actually happen without one, right? Through immersion, just by being surrounded by the language. Oh, absolutely. You can definitely pick up a language just by, living in a country where it's spoken, or just being around people who use it all the time.
Exactly. But the book emphasizes that a teacher's role is about making that learning process much more successful. It's about actively guiding and shaping how the learning unfolds. And that brings us to a really important concept: rapport.
Rapport.
Yeah, the book really highlights how crucial it is to create a positive classroom atmosphere, a place where students feel comfortable, supported, almost like a safe space to experiment with the language and make mistakes.
Oh, I think we all remember those teachers, right? The ones who just had this knack for creating a great learning environment where you felt, you could really try things out.
Yes, absolutely. But the book also acknowledges that defining what it means to be, quote unquote, generally friendly to your students,
Mm.
it's actually pretty tricky. Like, it seems intuitive, but breaking it down into concrete actions is surprisingly difficult.
Yeah, yeah. It's one of those things that, you just kind of feel rather than something you can necessarily explain.
Right. But it does explore some of the components that contribute to this positive atmosphere. Things like showing genuine respect for your students, ensuring fairness in your interactions with them, giving clear and constructive feedback, using humor, appropriately of course, and demonstrating patience, particularly when learners are struggling. And maintaining a non-judgmental attitude, creating that space where mistakes are seen as opportunities for growth.
Yeah, that's so important, that idea of not making students feel judged when they make mistakes, because we all do, especially when we're learning something new. And what I found encouraging was the book points out that a lot of these qualities, while they might seem like personality traits, they're actually skills that can be developed, honed, and improved upon.
That's right. It's not just about having a certain type of personality.
Yep.
It's about consciously cultivating these approaches and behaviors that foster that positive learning environment. And the book even brings in the work of Carl Rogers. Now, he identified three core characteristics of effective helpers, and this applies to teachers as well: respect, empathy, and authenticity.
Oh yeah, those are powerful. And I really like that emphasis on authenticity, that idea of connecting with your students on a genuine human level, not just as a teacher-student kind of transaction.
Absolutely. And that connection, that human connection, really plays into how the learning itself actually happens. And the book introduces this concept called the experiential learning cycle. So the idea is students actively do something, then they recall what they did, reflect on that experience, draw conclusions from it, and then use those conclusions to inform their future actions. It's a continuous cycle.
Yeah, I like that. It's much more dynamic than, just sort of sitting there and being lectured at. And it actually reminds me of the book mentions this quite vividly, the jug and mug approach, where, the teacher is just pouring knowledge into the students' heads as if they're empty vessels.
Right, exactly. The book really moves away from that passive model of learning and language learning, like any skill.
Yeah.
You've got to actively engage with it. You've got to use it. You've got to make mistakes.
Absolutely. And something else the book really stresses is that, learners aren't blank slates.
Right.
They're not just empty vessels waiting to be filled. They come to the classroom with their own unique backgrounds, experiences, perspectives, personalities, their whole selves.
And that's really important for us to remember as teachers that, teaching and learning are not the same thing. You can be diligently teaching, but that doesn't automatically mean that your students are learning, in the way that you intend or even at all.
Yeah, that's a really good point to keep in mind. Okay, so we've talked about the teacher, we've talked about the learning environment, but now let's get into the real nitty-gritty. What exactly is the subject matter when we talk about English language teaching? What are we actually trying to teach?
Well, the obvious things that spring to mind, of course, are grammar and vocabulary.
Right.
Those are the building blocks, right?
Right.
But the book actually takes a much broader view.
Mm-hmm.
It also includes equipping learners with better ways of learning, so essentially developing their study skills, their learning strategies.
Yeah.
And then there are exam techniques, which, let's face it, for a lot of students, that's a very real part of their learning journey.
Right.
They're taking these exams to prove their proficiency. And this is a really key point, the book includes working with and learning about other people.
Oh, that's interesting.
So it emphasizes the social and intercultural dimensions of language learning. It's not just about the language itself. It's about how we use it to communicate, to connect with others, to understand different cultures.
So it's really about communication, isn't it? The purpose of language is to communicate.
Absolutely. And that comes across very strongly in the book. It's not just about, memorizing rules and words in isolation. It's about that whole process of acquiring a language and being able to use it effectively in different contexts.
Okay, so how does the book break down the language itself? Because I know it talks about language systems and language skills.
Right. So language systems are the fundamental elements of how the language works. You've got phonology, which is the sound system. Then you've got lexis, which is the vocabulary, the words we use. Then there's grammar, the rules that govern how we structure sentences. Function, which is what we use language to do, like making requests, apologizing, giving instructions. And then discourse, which is how we put language together in longer stretches, like conversations or written texts.
Right. And then the language skills are about how we actually use those systems.
Exactly. So the language skills are typically divided into productive skills, which are speaking and writing, where the learner is creating language. And then receptive skills, which are listening and reading, where the learner is understanding language produced by others.
Okay, so it's all connected, right? The systems and the skills all work together.
Very much so.
Yeah.
And to illustrate this really clearly, the book uses this very simple example, the phrase "pass me the book," and it shows how this seemingly straightforward request can be analyzed at all these different levels. So phonologically, we can look at the individual sounds that make up the words, how pronounced. Lexically, we consider the meaning of each word: pass, me, the book. Grammatically, it's an imperative sentence structure. It's a command with a verb, a direct object, and an indirect object. Functionally, it's a request. And discursively, well, the meaning and appropriateness of that request can change depending on who's speaking, who they're speaking to, their relationship, the context of the situation. If you say it in a certain way, it might sound more like an order than a request.
Oh, yeah. Tone of voice can definitely change things.
Absolutely. And the book really stresses that it's the language skills, that practical application of the language in real-life situations. That's the ultimate goal. It's about enabling learners to participate in conversations, understand instructions, read articles, listen to podcasts, all the things that we use language for in our daily lives.
And I've noticed in recent years, there's been a bit of a shift, hasn't there, in language teaching from maybe a very heavy focus on grammar and vocabulary to maybe more of an emphasis on those speaking and listening skills, that practical communication side of things.
Yes, definitely. I think there's a growing recognition that, while grammar and vocabulary are essential, they're not the only pieces of the puzzle.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it's about being able to use the language effectively to communicate and connect with others.
Right, right. And the book has some really great advice for teachers who are just starting out, some really practical tips.
Oh, absolutely. One of the first things it stresses is learn your students' names.
Oh, yeah.
Seems like such a basic thing, but it can make a huge difference in creating that sense of connection and respect in the classroom.
It shows you care, right?
Exactly. And the book even offers some really helpful strategies for doing this, like having students create little mini maps of the classroom and mark where they're sitting with their name, or using small name cards on their desks, or even having them hold up bigger name cards at the beginning so you can really associate the names with the faces.
That's a good idea.
And another piece of advice that really resonated with me was be yourself.
Be yourself.
Yeah, students are pretty perceptive. They can usually sense when someone's being, inauthentic or putting on a persona.
Yeah. You can't really fake it, can you?
Not for long.
Hmm.
So the book encourages teachers to, bring their authentic selves to the classroom.
And it also addresses a common misconception, I think, that teaching means the teacher has to be talking all the time or actively teaching every single moment of the lesson.
Yes, and it makes a really good point about the value of silence in the classroom. Giving students time to process information, to reflect, to work independently, that's crucial for deeper learning.
Yeah, I mean, we don't always need to be filling every space with words. Sometimes silence is really important.
Absolutely. And the book really emphasizes the importance of structuring activities, designing activities that encourage students to actively engage with the material and with each other.
So let's talk about those activities, because I know the book talks about using coursebook material effectively, which I think is kind of the foundation for a lot of teachers when they're planning their lessons.
It is, yes.
Yeah.
And it outlines the different ways that you can arrange those learning activities. You can have students working individually, in pairs, in small groups, in larger groups, or as a whole class.
Right, and each of those has its own advantages and disadvantages, I guess, depending on what you're trying to achieve.
Absolutely. So individual work can be great for, fostering concentration, allowing students to work at their own pace. Pair work, well, that promotes collaboration, that peer-to-peer learning, that interaction. Small groups can encourage more in-depth discussion, problem solving. And then whole class activities are really good for, sharing information, giving instructions, building a sense of community within the classroom.
Yeah, and the book provides this really useful framework for thinking about any activity, doesn't it? The activity route map.
Yes, this is a really helpful way of breaking down an activity into different stages. So you've got what you do before the lesson to prepare, then you've got the lead-in or the preparation you do in class to engage the students with the topic. Then you've got the setting up of the task, where you give really clear instructions. Then, of course, you've got the actual running of the activity itself, where you're monitoring, observing, providing support. Then you've got the closing of the activity, bringing it to a natural conclusion. And then a really important stage, the post-activity stage, where you might give feedback, have a discussion about what they learned, or set up some follow-up tasks.
Right, so it's not just about the activity itself, it's about how you frame it, and what you do before and after that really makes a difference. And I particularly like the idea of exploiting an activity.
Ah, yes. This is about getting the most out of an activity, maximizing its potential beyond its initial purpose. So, for example, you might have a reading comprehension task, but then you could follow that up with a discussion that focuses on specific vocabulary from the text, or a writing task that asks students to use the language they've encountered in the reading. Or you might even notice a particular grammar point that comes up naturally and decide to spend some time exploring that.
Oh, okay, so it's like layering the learning, kind of building on what they've already done.
Exactly. And for those early lessons, when students are just starting out, the book really highlights the value of pair work and information gaps.
Information gaps.
Yeah, so pair work, we've talked about that, students working in pairs. And an information gap activity is designed so that each student in the pair has some information that the other student needs. So they have to communicate, they have to ask questions, they have to share information to complete the task.
Oh, I see. So it creates this real need to communicate, this genuine communicative purpose.
Exactly. And it's a great way to encourage speaking and listening right from the start.
Okay, and I know the book also mentions small group work. And it even suggests using board games as a way to stimulate discussion. That sounds fun.
It can be, yes. Board games can be a really effective way to create a more relaxed, engaging atmosphere for language practice. And if you choose or adapt the games carefully, you can really target specific language points or skills.
So it doesn't feel so much like work,
Yeah.
right? It's more like play.
Right, exactly. That element of fun can really lower inhibitions and make students more willing to participate and take risks with the language.
Okay, so we've talked about activities, but of course we can't talk about what happens in the classroom without talking about classroom management.
Yes, that's a big one. It's something every teacher has to grapple with.
And the book actually defines it quite broadly, doesn't it?
It does. It sees classroom management as encompassing all the decisions a teacher makes about what happens in that learning space.
Hmm.
It's about establishing and maintaining those conditions that are conducive to effective learning for everyone.
Right. And it boils down those basic skills of classroom management to three key stages: look, options, actions.
Yes, so look is about being aware, constantly observing what's happening in the classroom, noticing student behavior, how they're interacting, their levels of engagement. Options is about considering the range of choices you have as a teacher in response to different situations that might arise. And then actions is about actually deciding on and implementing the most appropriate response, taking action to address the situation effectively.
And it gives some really practical examples, doesn't it, of how to choose your actions based on what's actually happening.
It does. So, for example, what do you do if a student finishes an activity much earlier than everyone else? Or if students are getting off task, starting to chat about something else, getting distracted? The book provides a range of strategies for dealing with these kinds of situations.
Right, because there's no one-size-fits-all solution, is there? It really depends on the specific context.
Exactly. And it also highlights the importance of varying those patterns of interaction within the classroom. So, moving from whole class teaching to small group work, to pair work, to individual work, keeping things dynamic and catering to those different learning preferences.
Yeah, keeps things interesting, keeps the energy up.
Absolutely. And even something as simple as seating arrangements can make a big difference.
Oh, yeah. Do you have them in rows, in a circle, in groups?
The book discusses all sorts of options. You've got your traditional fixed rows, but then you've got more flexible arrangements where you can move the desks around, create different configurations. You can have students facing each other, facing away from each other, sitting in circles in horseshoes. And each of those arrangements can facilitate different types of activities and interactions.
Yeah, it's almost like the physical space itself can influence how the learning happens.
It really can.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's the very basic but crucial skill of giving instructions.
Yeah.
And the book talks about, making those instructions clear, concise, checking that students have actually understood what they're supposed to do.
Yeah, because if they don't understand the instructions, they're not going to be able to do the activity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it also touches on the decision of whether to use English or the learner's native language when you're giving instructions, especially in a multilingual classroom.
Right.
And then there's the art of monitoring during activities. So what you're doing as a teacher while the students are busy working.
Oh, yeah, because you don't want to just be standing there at the front ignoring them.
Right. The book talks about, deciding what your role is during monitoring, being present, but monitoring discreetly so you're not interrupting the flow or intimidating students.
Yeah, just kind of observing, seeing how they're getting on, being available if they need help.
Exactly. And knowing when to step back, to almost vanish, and allow the students the space to work independently, to problem solve, to figure things out for themselves.
Right. That's really important to give them that autonomy.
It is. And finally, in this section on classroom management, the book introduces a technique called eliciting.
Eliciting.
So this is about drawing information out of students rather than directly giving it to them. Using pictures, gestures, carefully phrased questions to guide them towards the answer, to encourage them to recall or produce language based on their existing knowledge.
So it's about making them think, making them work for it a little bit rather than just passively receiving the information.
Exactly. It encourages that active engagement, that deeper processing. Okay, so we've covered a lot about the teacher, the classroom, activities, but now let's shift our focus to the heart of it all, the learners themselves.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, it's all about them, isn't it?
Absolutely. And the book really emphasizes the incredible diversity that exists among language learners. They have different reasons for learning English, different beliefs about how languages are best learned, different learning styles, different challenges they might be facing, different types of intelligence. Figure 4.1 of the book, it's a wonderful visual representation of this multifaceted diversity, shows all these different factors that come into play.
And that's important, right? To recognize that there's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Exactly. Every learner is unique, and effective teaching requires us to to understand and respond to that individuality as much as possible. The book also digs into the concept of motivation, distinguishing between external motivation, like needing to pass an exam for a job, and internal motivation, which might be a genuine interest in the language and culture.
Oh, yeah. I mean, some people are just naturally curious about languages, aren't they?
They are. And both types of motivation, internal and external, can have a huge impact on a learner's success. And the book also touches on the idea of multiple intelligences, the idea that we all have different strengths and weaknesses in how we learn and process information. Some people are more visual learners, some are more auditory, some are more kinesthetic, and so on.
Yeah, I remember learning about that. And there's also the whole issue of sensory preferences, isn't there? Whether someone learns best by seeing, hearing, or doing.
Absolutely. And then, of course, there's the reality of mixed-level classes, which I think most teachers have to deal with at some point.
Oh, yeah, where you've got students with a wide range of abilities in the same class.
Exactly. And this can be a real challenge, trying to cater to those different needs and levels. The book discusses some of the reasons why this happens. Sometimes students are grouped by age rather than ability, or individuals just progress at different rates. And it offers some general strategies for managing mixed-level classes, but it acknowledges that there's no easy solution.
It's definitely something that requires a lot of flexibility and creativity from the teacher.
It does. And another really important point the book makes is get feedback from your learners.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. Ask them what's working, what's not working.
Exactly. Find out what they're finding helpful, what they're finding challenging. And it suggests different ways to do this, through quick checks during lessons, having little reflections at the end of an activity, or even more structured feedback sessions where you sit down and have a more in-depth conversation.
Right. And it's not just about improving your teaching, is it? It's also about empowering the learners, making them feel like they have a voice, that their opinions matter.
Absolutely. And then in this section on understanding learners, the book introduces the concept of learner training.
Learner training.
Yeah, this is about equipping students with the skills and strategies to become more effective and autonomous learners.
Yeah.
Giving them those tools to take control of their own learning.
So things like study skills, time management, how to learn vocabulary effectively.
Exactly. And the book suggests, practical ways to integrate this into your lessons. So you might explicitly teach study skills. You might make students aware of the reasons behind different classroom activities, why you're doing what you're doing, and you might encourage them to reflect on their own learning processes, what works best for them.
Okay, so we've really delved into the learners. Now let's go back to the language itself, because the book has a whole chapter on language analysis for teachers, which sounds a bit daunting.
I know, but it's not as scary as it sounds. It's really about developing that deeper understanding of how the English language works, going beyond just recognizing grammatical structures or knowing vocabulary and really understanding their meaning and how they're used in communication.
So it's more than just the what, it's the how and the why.
Exactly. And it introduces these fundamental concepts for analyzing grammar, and it provides some really practical tools. Like it talks about substitution tables, which can be really helpful for teaching grammar.
Substitution table.
Yeah, so these are like grids or tables that show how you can systematically change one element of a sentence while keeping the basic structure the same.
Oh, okay.
So students can practice different variations and see how the meaning changes. And the book also provides a nice overview of basic English grammar, the different types of verbs, nouns, pronouns, prepositions, all those building blocks of the language.
Right, and that's useful even for native speakers, I think, to kind of refresh their knowledge of how the language actually works.
Absolutely. And then it moves on to analyzing word meaning. And it highlights this crucial point that words don't always have fixed, precise meanings. It depends on the context.
Oh, yeah, context is everything, isn't it?
It is. And the book uses the example of the word wellies.
Yeah.
It's a very British word for rubber boots.
Oh, wellies.
Wellies. And someone from a different English-speaking background might have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, that's true.
So it highlights those regional variations and the importance of understanding the cultural context of language. And then there's the concept of collocations, which are words that typically go together. We say strong coffee, not powerful coffee.
Right. So it's about those natural combinations of words that make your English sound more fluent and more native-like.
Exactly.
Right.
And then the analysis moves on to the grammatical level. So looking at how different grammatical elements contribute to the meaning of a sentence.
Mm.
The difference between I went to the shop and I'm going to the shop.
Right. That little change in tense can make a big difference in meaning.
Absolutely. And then we get to the really interesting part, which is analyzing communicative function.
Communicative function.
So this is about understanding why people say or write particular things, what they're trying to achieve through their communication. Like the classic example, could you pass the sugar?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's grammatically a question, but it's really a request, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the book emphasizes that to really understand language, we need to consider the context, the speaker's intention, the relationship between the speakers, all those factors that contribute to meaning.
So it's about reading between the lines, isn't it? Understanding what's not explicitly stated.
It is. And the book also introduces the related concepts of functions and exponents,
Yeah.
which is basically the different ways that we can express a particular function.
Yeah.
Like asking for information. We can do that through direct questions, indirect questions, statements with rising intonation. There are lots of different ways to achieve the same communicative goal.
And finally, in the language analysis section, the book introduces this really interesting idea of English and English teaching in the world.
Yes, this is a really important perspective.
And it talks about world Englishes, which is, all the different varieties of English that are spoken globally, and then English as a lingua franca, or ELF.
Right, so it recognizes that English isn't just this monolithic language anymore. It exists in all these different forms and is used in so many different contexts around the world, and particularly the concept of ELF, the idea that, a lot of communication in English these days is happening between non-native speakers, not necessarily involving native speakers at all.
And that has implications, doesn't it, for how we teach English and what we prioritize?
Absolutely. So we've covered a lot of theoretical ground, but now let's get into the practicalities of planning lessons and courses.
Yeah, how do we actually put all this into practice?
Well, a good starting point is understanding how people actually learn languages. And the book outlines a model of this process, highlighting the importance of input, so exposure to the language, then various internal learning processes like understanding, memory, reflection, noticing patterns, preparing to use the language, and then output, the actual active use of the language. And it distinguishes between restricted output, which might be more controlled practice activities, and authentic output, which is using the language in more real-life situations.
Right. So you need both. You need that balance of structured practice and then opportunities to use the language in a more meaningful way.
Absolutely. And the book outlines some common lesson structures, the traditional present practice produce model, but also alternatives like test, teach, test, and task-based learning, which can be more engaging for learners.
And when you're planning any lesson, it all starts with having clear objectives, right? Knowing what you want your learners to be able to do by the end of it.
Absolutely. You need those clear achievement aims to guide your planning and your assessment. And then the book talks about different approaches to lesson planning itself. You've got your very detailed, formal plans, but then you've got more flexible running order plans and even more adaptable jungle path plans, which allow for more spontaneity and responsiveness to what's happening in the classroom.
Jungle path. That sounds exciting.
It can be. It's about recognizing that sometimes you need to deviate from the plan, adapt to the learner's needs in the moment. And then, of course, there's the bigger picture of planning an entire course, which involves considering the overall learning objectives, the syllabus, the learner's needs, and how individual lessons will build on each other. And the book also, it doesn't shy away from the realities of teaching. It talks about unrealistic expectations, like feeling like you have to stick rigidly to a course book, even when it might not be the best fit for your learners.
Oh, yeah. I mean, course books are a resource, aren't they? They're not the Bible.
Exactly. And it emphasizes the importance of teachers using their professional judgment, adapting materials, and being responsive to their students' needs. And it goes back to that fundamental point about teachers understanding grammar, not just knowing the rules, but understanding how it works, how it's used, how it conveys meaning.
Because if you don't understand it yourself, how can you teach it?
Exactly. And it talks about different approaches to teaching grammar, the traditional present practice approach, but also clarification approaches, which can involve direct explanation, guided discovery, or self-directed discovery. And then for the practice stage, it introduces those restricted output activities like drills, repetition, substitution, transformation drills, which can be quite useful for developing fluency and accuracy.
Right. So those are the more controlled practice activities.
Yes, but it also mentions other ways to work with grammar, like using the test, teach, test framework, or incorporating total physical response, where students respond physically to language commands.
Oh, yeah, that can be a lot of fun.
It can. And then finally, in this section on planning, the book emphasizes the importance of lexis, vocabulary.
Vocabulary, yeah, that's key, isn't it?
It is, and it highlights the close relationship between vocabulary, lexis, and grammar. They're all interconnected, and it suggests lots of different lexical practice activities and games. And it also makes the point that, sometimes student-generated vocabulary lists, if they're not created in a meaningful context, might not be that helpful for long-term learning.
So it's not just about memorizing lists of words, it's about understanding how those words are used, how they fit into the bigger picture of the language.
Exactly. So we've covered an awful lot in this deep dive, and we've only just scratched the surface of this fantastic book, Learning Teaching. But hopefully it's given you a